Hello, and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Allen. How's it going, man?
Ben, I had a monologue prepared about the NFL season starting, and it's the most important time of the year. And have my Steelers jersey on, and I'm ready to go get my heart broken again. But I actually did want to take a more serious note to congratulate and just acknowledge Corey Mole and Miles Split, who stepped away for Miles Split earlier this week. For those of you who don't know, I wrote for Miles Split for about 2.5 years, and Corey, who was the chief of content there, was my editor. He has been one of the best people in this business. He's been a phenomenal mentor. He's just been a truly great guy. He has made so much of a positive impact on so many high schools and families, and he's been really, really good for this sport, and he's helped me out a ton just in terms of bouncing ideas and what do I do, and I'm still so young and new to this space, and he's been just a phenomenal mentor. And so just want to congratulate him on his time, and I hope he's still around this space because he was one of the good guys.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he built a lot of what I think we see
Yeah.
in terms of not only at Mile Split, but in track and field in general, the way the sport's covered. So I join you in wishing him well as he goes forward in his new ventures. But yeah, hey, we're doing this episode on the first day of the first Sunday of the NFL season. So this is only the beginning of all the monologues that we're gonna have about the Eagles and Steelers and all these things that you guys may just fast forward through in the future. So we're gonna have our takes. We'll try not to have them go for too long in the future. But with all that said, we got some NCAA stuff to talk about. Not a whole lot of news, and after last week we had rankings and a bunch of other things to talk about. This week a little bit lighter, so we wanted to go through and just kind of talk about some of the storylines that we're looking forward to seeing this year, as well as giving out a few hot takes at the end. But before we get started on that, reminder, leave those ratings and reviews on Apple, Spotify, commenting on YouTube. I don't think we got any new ones this week, which is, hey, that's okay. We're building up for the season. I get it. Bring those in next week. Anything else before we push on, Garrett?
Let's push on.
All right. First bit of news is the NCAA settlement, which we've talked extensively about in previous podcasts, so we're not going to rehash any of that, has essentially been kind of put on hold, more or less, according to ESPN. The judge is urging revisions and asking the lawyers to go back to the drawing board for this settlement. The judge declined to grant preliminary approval for this settlement. One of her concerns was that the money provided by boosters must be given to athletes for a valid business purpose rather than just to be paid to be an athlete at that school. So, this settlement, which we think is going to completely upend what we know the NCAA to look like, is probably going to come into effect in a very different way than maybe what we first anticipated, at least according to what the judge is at least wanting, it seems.
Yeah, that's an interesting interpretation. Like trying to interpret like what a business purpose is.
Right. It's
It's
so
like, well,
vague.
couldn't you argue that it's all a business purpose? Like, it's like, yeah, you're trying to make revenue. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But like, it's what it is. But I will say this: this is what I wanted. I wanted someone to just be like, whoa, 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 let's bring this back, see what actually is going to happen. Let's get the fine details figured out. I'm still scared that the roster limit sizes and the immediate loss of talent from rosters and cuts and all of that nature, I am scared that that's still not going to be discussed or touched on. I hope it is. Um, but at the very least, this is at least what I was hoping would happen.
Yeah. It all seemed a little rushed, and the fact that it was going to be implemented almost like right away also felt super rushed. So I think the fact that this will be looked at further, they'll hopefully be able to have more people involved, kind of model this out and see what the effect will be, I think is only a good thing moving forward. So we don't really have to, unless you have anything else, we don't really need to
Nope.
touch on this any further, but definitely wanted to bring this up because obviously this will have a big impact. Whatever form this settlement comes to an agreement at will have a huge impact on the NCAA.
I agree. I agree. But let's instead jump into our most intriguing storylines, which we're going to each have three each. And then we're each going to have two uh, bold takes, hot takes, just kind of like how we did last year. In fact, Ben, I actually listened back to last
Oh,
year's podcast. The takes were not they were very
oh,
spicy, but they were not
over.
accurate. Yeah, they were not great. So, but let's start there, and I'll give the floor to you. What is the one of the three storylines that you are most fascinated about this fall?
So the first one for me is, what does Colorado look like under Carlson
Ah,
his first season?
yes, that was
It's
my
it's
number one.
it's a very obvious one, but it is probably the most pressing question. This is a historic program going under a new coach in a different direction. They haven't been super competitive at the national stage for a couple years now. How quickly does Carlson turn that around? He obviously brought some of the Tennessee guys with him that I think should bring stability. But I guess I'm more interested in seeing, on the men and women's side, who develops and who maybe is a contributor in a bigger way than we expected. We know, like, kind of the men and women that are expected to be valuable scorers, but who develops, what does the recruiting look like over this next couple of months as well? Like, is he going to just you could see just a historic recruiting class come
Oh
through,
yeah.
the way he's able to recruit, and asking student athletes to come to Boulder and run in Colorado, that's going to be an easy sell. So I think over the next couple months, that's one of the most interesting things that I'll be paying attention to.
What does a successful season for the Colorado
Mhm.
men and the Colorado women look like?
I think for the men, top half finish at NCAA's. I think that that would constitute a
So
successful season.
15th place finish. They have to be inside the top 16.
Yeah, yeah, that's I think that's a win, right? I don't necessarily think a top 20 finish is a bad year. I think that the expectations at Colorado are a little higher than just top 20. On the women's
Um,
side, I think is really just development. Like, do you see there's a couple women that you feel good about in the future? Like, at the end of the day, I think making nationals would be great, but I think they want to put the building blocks in place, kind of like he did at Tennessee on the women's side over the first couple of years, to make a podium team in the next 2 3 years. And I think that starts with maybe coming up with one or two women from this year's roster that you feel good about leading the way in 2 or 3 years.
so so we agree that like making nationals is considered a successful season for
Yes.
the
Oh
women?
yeah. Yeah. Like, it's a for me, again, it's a pretty low bar in terms of like the actual team success for the women's side. I'm more looking at, like, this is a rebuilding year. What pieces are going to contribute to the next great Colorado team?
Okay, I'm going to go through all the not all the teams, but a number of teams in the Big 12, and I want you to tell me if you
Mhm.
think Colorado will be better or worse than them on the women's side. On the women's side,
Okay. This is tough.
BYU,
No.
right? Iowa State,
No.
no. Okay,
Well, I don't know.
yeah,
That one's
that'll be tight. That'll be
That
tight.
that they're gonna be right neck and neck. I'm gonna go no for now, but I
Okay,
could absolutely see them flip flopping at some point.
Oklahoma State.
No, I don't think.
Mm. Texas Tech. Actually, their new additions are more on the men's side, so I'm going to pass on
Yeah, I
them.
was gonna say yeah.
Utah,
No,
yeah, and then West Virginia. That's I think the one that I
I
want to
think they'll
see.
be better than West Virginia.
I will say West Virginia did add two internationals, so I don't think we really know anything too much about them, but like it will be interesting.
I mean,
So
Oklahoma. It's interesting. Like, Oklahoma State, Colorado, and Iowa State are all kind of like these programs that have had great success, especially Oklahoma State recently, but are going through kind of a shift in their roster, and eh, it could be anybody's guess on how any, like, the order of those three teams finish at Big 12s. I don't feel great about saying Colorado's going to lose to either of those teams.
yeah, no, I would probably agree with that. But I also like I would not be surprised if they got fourth at the Big 12 championships.
No. I mean, that's in the. I think that, what, fourth through seventh. like could be pretty much in flux. I mean, third through like sixth or seventh, like that.
Well, I think BYU, I think Utah, and I
Utah.
think yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe third through seven. Yeah, I thought there was going to be a third team that I kind of felt better about, but I don't think I do.
Yeah, I think it's really those 2 and then everybody else, and I mean, the Big 12 is just more and more exciting, like,
Yeah.
obviously, the addition of BYU, but now these other teams coming back to the BY or to the Big 12, Colorado and specifically, it's gonna be a fantastic meet, to watch this year.
All right, I'm going to take over for my next headline, my next storyline to watch, and I think it's the international influence.
Sure.
You want to talk? I mean, there's been so many new names that have come that we just haven't been able to cover, and we'll have actually an article if you're listening to this. It's Wednesday. I don't know if it's going to come a little bit before Wednesday, maybe after, maybe we have to push it. I don't know, but we are going to have an article highlighting a handful of the international names who maybe we haven't touched on yet, and you talk about like Auburn has added good names, West Virginia, Texas Tech especially has added some really good names. I think like Texas Tech could qualify for the national meet, and I don't think that's a hot take.
No.
Tulane has added a handful of interesting guys. There's a lot of movement, and like there's going to be, I think at least four to five new teams that didn't qualify for the national meet last year that will this year. Um, and I'm kind of not even really factoring the Alabama men into that conversation. But this is like a completely different uh, like landscape now, and the personnel that you're going to see at these meets are very interesting. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so I have kind of ones kinda like that, but it sounds like you're talking about more from, like, the team perspective, right? Whereas the ability to recruit internationally can just reshape teams overnight, right?
Yeah,
Where you can go from a team that's not even close to the national meet to a pretty good contender to make it,
and I think it's gonna be
and
Texas Tech.
and it's gonna happen with like just a couple of new international recruits, and as we talked about before, I think that's going to continue to be the trend, especially with the if the settlement goes through in any form that we've seen. There's going to be a lot of money available for these type of athletes, and I think we're going to get it kind of a crash course in how easily that like how quickly you can turn that around, right? Where you can have a program that's just not nationally relevant to nationally relevant, like with completely new men or women to the NCAA. How does that work? Like, I think we're going to see mixed results across the board this year. And I think we're obviously going to see more and more of that. But I'm very curious to see like the success rate on that. And I think we're going to get our first taste this year.
Yeah, like Virginia Tech, I think brought in two international names of their own, and I'm like, okay, yeah, we're gonna be relevant in cross country. Maybe not, but I don't know. It's been a minute since that has happened, but yeah, I just think it's going to be a little bit more. I don't even know what the right word is. I think it's going to be a little bit more prevalent than maybe we realize, and so I think there's going to be some teams, and I think Texas Tech is going to be one of them. West Virginia on the women's side. I think Clemson kind of their personnel hasn't really changed, but on the women's side, it's notable there. So there's a large handful of names who I've not spoken about yet, but yeah,
Yeah, great one. My second storyline, and it's similar, and it's kind of based off of what you're talking about. Is are we going to start to see more parity across the NCAA? And I don't mean that necessarily in terms of like the group of five power group of five conferences versus the power four conferences. I mean, just like from a 1 to 15 in our rankings. Is that like gap going to start to shrink because there's just going to be so many different schools trying to recruit these men or women. There's going to be so much more competition in theory, at least among these top teams who are really going for it, that I think we could start to see a lot more variability. And I think the days of those dynasties are like the NAUs, like the I mean, what Wisconsin, like from back in the day, the Oklahoma States, like those I think are going to be happening less and less. Where I just think there's going to be this shift towards more of an open market where more and more teams can be quickly get very, very top heavy and compete at the highest end. And so I wonder if we're going to see that this year where things start to get shrunk and the margin from if you finish fifth to the margin if you're finishing 14th is way lower than it has been before.
I think I agree with that in the sense of a much grander scheme of things. I think that's going to be more noticeable over time. I don't know if I would establish that as like a 1 year storyline, but could this be the start of that overarching narrative? Yeah, for sure. I think that's a fair point to make. I think, especially with a lot of uncertainty still about that settlement and about what you deem as a business purpose based
Yeah.
on just the brief article that we found on ESPN. But it's one of those things where I go like, I don't know that we're really like into this yet. I don't think like the NCAA is fully invested in this yet. I still think there's probably 40%, 30% more investment that's going to happen on an international scale. And so I think that's going to happen more over longer term.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's why I'm just curious to see this year. We're just dipping our
Yeah.
toes in it, and if there's a impact, if there's an impact like that already, just imagine what it's going to be like in the future. So I think this could be kind of a telltale sign for what the NCAA picture could look like, and we're gonna get a pretty good glimpse, I think, this year. What's your next storyline?
My next storyline, and it's a team that you and I both love. Can you guess actually what this is?
Men or women?
Men.
Team that both you and I love.
I use the
Uh,
term love in a slightly
uh,
slightly ironic way.
Stanford?
It's Stanford,
There
yes.
you go.
Stanford men. Um, Last year, like they're a historical powerhouse. There are teams that like that you just shouldn't have a Porter season.
Yeah,
Like if you're a certain team like Oregon, no excuse for them being as poor as they were last year. No excuse.
yeah.
Colorado men. Well, they got a new coach, new personnel, same thing. There's really no reason for them to be as poor. Same thing with the women, actually. But it's like Colorado, Wisconsin, I'd maybe throw in there, NAU, BYU nowadays, Oklahoma State nowadays, Oregon and Stanford. I think Stanford's one of those things where it's like, I don't, when I kind of look at like what happened last year, and yes, they were eighth at the national meet, which I will give them a ton of credit for. But leading up to that and throughout most of it, it wasn't pretty. Like eighth should be their floor. And so I now wonder what happens without Kai Robinson. This is a big year for a bunch of young guys. Like a bunch of youngsters are going to have to step up. They're going to be in the ACC, which is a historically deep conference. With each of these teams boast a ton of depth too. Um, I don't know like really what we're going to get out of Stanford. I think it could be really dramatic in terms of the swing of possible results.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's a fairly pivotal year on the women's side for them too, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they've brought
Yep.
in so much talent and they haven't had great results to like speak of on the women's side. And I mean, do we think that this is a pretty important year for Coach JJ Clark in terms of like first year in the ACC? You've amassed all this talent, you've been given pretty good resources. Like, do we think that those seat could get a little warm if not hot, but it could get warm if they don't have a great inaugural campaign?
I don't know if I see it like that because when you put Juliet Whitaker into the 800-meter finals at the
That's
Olympics,
that's true.
really hard to argue against that. When you have that middle distance success that they've had, cross country is kind of like, like whatever. Like Amy Bunnage was like NCAA number 3 all time in the women's indoor 5K last year,
Yeah.
this past winter. So I think there's enough like track success for me to be like, nah, he's actually a very good coach there. But like on the women's side too, you kind of think about it like I kind of keep finding ourselves back at this place where we're like, well, this is a really important year for Stanford, and we just
And
keep
that's
saying
what
the
I'm
same
saying.
thing.
I just like feel like we keep getting to this point where there's underwhelming cross country result and all the track success is well noted, and that's I think a very fair point. Like I don't think that the fact that there's been so much success for the youngsters, like particularly in the middle distances right away, I think has been a huge win for him, for Coach Clark and the program. But it just every cross country season just seems like what is happening here?
Yeah, and like, and here's the thing: Stanford looked like a podium team last fall. The women did,
Yeah.
and then they went to the national meet and they struggled,
Yeah.
and they had no All Americans, which was like, whoa. I'll be interested to see what happens. I think Stanford's a fascinating team. I think they should always be good, and I just don't know what's going to happen.
Agreed. All right, I'll go to my final interesting storyline that I'm watching this year. And the last one I have is how good is Pamela Kosgei going to be in her first
You took mine too.
year?
What?
Great
I,
minds,
I was like, there's no shot he has that one too. There's no shot.
great minds think alike. So I mean, obviously, we both feel like this. She's probably one of the more interesting runners to watch this year because, really, I mean, you look at it. I'll ask you. I'll set the over under at 3.5. How many women do you feel realistically can win an NCAA title on the women's side?
If Billup Chipkiri runs this season, it's over 4. If she doesn't, it's under 3. Oh
Yeah,
no, 3.5.
I
Under
know,
three
three
and
and
a
a
half.
half.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I feel the same way. It really feels like, and this is how it's been over the last couple of years, where there's like one or two like real strong candidates, and the fact that we're talking about obviously Doris Lemongol, Hilda Olmame, very like not very established in Lemongol's case, but like they've shown what they can do in at least a year in the NCAA. Kosgei coming in, all the talent in the world, great PRs. Do we think she can just catapult right to the front? Like I think she has a great shot at being top five, and I think there's a very real world where she takes home the title. And I think that's a pretty wild thing to say for someone coming into their first year in the NCAA. And again, we've talked about this. We'll probably see more of this in the future, but I I just think she's going to be super interesting to watch every single race that she runs.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been as high on an international name as much as I have her. It's the pedigree mixed with the actual incredible results, mixed with some of the ridiculous times that she's posted at altitude, and even recently at the Portland Track Festival. And I think also part of it's like we saw what Doris Lemongol did last year,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of similarities there, especially with the steeplechase connection. And it's really hard to then be like, oh, and her sister is one of the greatest marathoners of the past, what, 5 years, 10 years, whatever.
yeah,
Um, it's, yeah, I mean, I don't know the marathon scene that well, but she's definitely up there for sure.
yes.
Um, it's hard not to be really, really high on her. Like, I don't know what the evidence is to suggest that she couldn't be or wouldn't be at like a national title winning level, and so that's where I get a little bit it's where I get a little tricky there. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Do you have a third storyline after I've sniped a couple of yours?
No, but if you give me 2 seconds, I can try to muster up one. I think and I'll kind of go for a little bit more of a softball one in comparison. But the men's individuals, Blanks, Wolf, and Samuel. Um,
Yeah.
this is like it's wild that like it feels like it's just continuous disrespect to Graham Blanks, who was undefeated last fall, won the national title, ran 13:03, got injured, still made the Olympic team,
Yep.
and yet Parker Wolf was so good, and Happen Samuel was so good to the point where I'm like, man, this is like a 3-person national title battle. I think there's 3 individuals, and I don't know the last time when I've seen someone as dominant as Graham Blanks, and then have had and then I have as many questions as I do about who's going to win NCAA gold. And so here I'll ask you this question: do you see anyone realistically challenging those 3 for NCAA gold?
Let me look real quick. My initial reaction is no. And yeah, I think maybe one of the Oklahoma State guys could enter the picture, but I would be pretty surprised. I think it really is those three and then everyone else.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a part of me that's like a little bit worried about what do some of the international names look like? Is there one name
Sure.
in particular who are just completely missing? But I also think it's really hard for me to justify someone being better than Hoptum Samuel, who's third in our rankings, who's
Yeah.
run 2650, low 50s. So yeah, I think I'm with you. I don't see a third one,
I
fourth
mean,
one
you look
coming
at
in.
each of those three men, and it's pretty much like the guy who raised their stock the most in each season, right? Where it's like blanks during cross country just went to another level, I think, in our mind. Parker Wolf beating Nico Young in at indoors, or
Outdoors.
outdoors, right? And then I mean Samuel having his fantastic outdoor season as well. Like I think both those two guys uh, had insanely good outdoor seasons, and so you can kind of if you want to pick one of them, you have ample reason to do so. But ultimately, I think Blanks what he has shown over the last 9, 10 months, I think ultimately makes him the favorite. But it's going to be a fun race at NCAA's. I think as long as those three names stay healthy, I think we're going to see those three with a K to go battling it out.
I agree. I agree. All right. We're doing hot takes. We're going to wrap up the podcast with hot takes. Shorter episode this week. We're going to have one hot take for the women each, one hot take for the men each. Mine are pretty spicy. I'm just going to say this. And we're also, I'm going to challenge you. We're also going to rank each other's bold takes on a spiciness scale, on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the most spiciest, 1 being as bland as you can get. So I'll let
Awesome.
you start.
All right, so my hot take, and this is more on the women's side, but it kind of does encompass both men and women here.
Mm, okay.
BYU takes home at least one national title this season. Not
I
the
don't hate that.
not the spiciest thing considering they're number 2 in both of our rankings, but they are facing against like pretty solid favorites. And I think ultimately we're going to see BYU on top of the podium on at least the men or women's side.
I don't disagree. Like I don't like I don't I'm not agreeing, but I don't disagree either. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
And
so as far as spiciness, what is that?
I'd give it a 5.
Yeah,
I think it's like, do I actually envision them beating NAU women or Oklahoma State men? No, I don't. But if something happened, could it sure. Yeah, I could see it. So I'll give it a 5. Like in theory, like when I look at it on paper, I go, nah, but when I think of it from if it was like a betting thing, I'd be like,
right.
oh yeah, I'd probably take that. Those are probably pretty good odds on something that's not entirely impossible. So
Yep.
yeah,
That's how
I'd
I
say
feel.
5. Okay. My hot take. My hot take is that the Penn State women
Whoa.
will be ranked in our top 15 at some point this fall.
Interesting. We haven't had a take quite like this where it's about our rankings during the season.
And then
All
the
right.
thing is, like, I just want to interrupt here. I am not the only one who contributes to these rankings. Okay, this is also 2 or 3 others who are also going to be working on this fall. So it's not just me.
That's
With
what
this
I
hot
was gonna
take.
say. Hey, women's team writers, don't let Garrett force Penn State into the top 15 just to get this through. So I think I like that, and I think that's a unique way of doing the take. So I'm definitely going to add a little spiciness because of that. I think I'll give you like a 7 on that one. I think
Yeah,
that's
that's what I would say.
I think that's a appropriate like it could happen. There's avenues to it, especially since you're giving it a wider time range. They just have to hit it really well, like one weekend essentially. They don't have
Yep.
to be consistent. But if they put together a really good race, top 15 is ambitious, which is why this is a 7. But I think that there are avenues to
I agree. I just think this team is going to be significantly better than they were last year. They have national meet experience. I think they're going to have at least 2 low sticks. There's a possibility for a third, a great stable fourth. If they have one great race, they will skyrocket, and they're already at 25 in our rankings. So, Penn State women, yeah, and it's crazy because I've never been the biggest Penn State guy growing up out of Philadelphia, just because of the. I'll say this: you want to talk about fans who are passionate? Whew, Penn State, man. I was actually,
that.
yeah, I was like, we were at a was at a brewery this past weekend, and it was celebrating someone's birthday, and there's a couple there who both went to Penn State, and they were playing Bowling Green. Bowling Green was like up by what
Yeah,
17
as a
points at
Penn
one.
State football fan, it was a very stressful Saturday morning.
Yeah, and so Penn State scored, but they're still down, and someone was like, "We are." I was like, "You're still losing. We are still losing." Like, now they won, thankfully, because then the car ride back with them would have been tough. But yeah, that's all I got.
All right. Uh, my second hot take, and this is on the men's side, is something that I think you probably could hear in my voice when we were discussing them in our rankings. And that is that the Eastern Kentucky men are going to finish
Mm,
top 10. I really like this team. I think they have the requisite pieces. You think about the possible low sticks. You think about the experience that a lot of these guys have from the returners last year, where they were obviously much better than what their end of season performance proved. I look at their depth, the possible front runners. I don't know if they're gonna have anybody that's like a true low stick, but I think they have too much talent to if things like fit together like 90% as well as they could, I think this could absolutely happen.
so here's the thing: I would have initially given that like an 8 out of 10 on the spiciness scale. Remember, this is a team that finished last at last year's national meet, and they lose a few names. Now they also bring in Justin Kipkowick, and some of their names have developed really nicely. They have good depth and steeplechase and yada yada yada. I would have put that at an 8, but for whatever reason, and I don't know what just happened. My monitor just there we go. My monitor's back, but I don't know what happened when everyone's now suddenly super high on the Eastern Kentucky. It's not just you; it's other outlets, and
Yeah.
I don't understand. I don't know where you're like definitively looking at this being like, well, they definitely have more than one All American. Like,
Yeah, and that's where it's like I don't disagree with our ranking. Like I mean I would have probably now that we've talked about it more and more over the past couple weeks, I probably would have had them like 3 or 4 spots higher.
yep.
But I don't think that they should be ranked in the top 10 because they're like again, it has to be like a 90th percentile outcome I think for them to get in there. But I think that is like I don't think there's a whole lot of teams like in our 20s that you could say their 90th percentile outcome is all the way to the top 10. And I think that's why I'm a lot more bullish on this team.
Yeah. So in the end, I think like based on what my initial expectations are versus what everyone's kind of oddly high on them, I would have said that's a 6 on that side, 8 on my side. I'll give it a 7 in the middle. So I'll give it a seven
That works for
spicy.
me.
Um, mine, and I don't know. Maybe this I can't really figure out. I think Dean Casey is going to be a top 20 talent.
Woo! All right. I like that. All right. Where did
Yeah,
we because we didn't have him ranked, right? Am
he's
I
an
he's
honorable
in our
mention.
honorable mention.
Yeah, honorable mention. I
Woo!
think he was really solid as a freshman. Not great, but solid. Really, really solid. I think he had the pedigree for to be successful
Yep.
already, especially over the longer distances. A year of experience is extremely crucial. I think there is now, I think like maybe like a renewed sense of excitement about what this fall could be, and
Yep.
I think he's also training at altitude. And I just I just struggle to imagine like him not making a significant leap. And I think if I want to be bold and I kind of want to pick a guy that's not really on anyone's like radar to kind of be a top 20 name, that's probably the guy I'm looking at. And I don't know. I just I've been high on him for a while, and I think you've kind of known that too. But
Yep.
I'll take Dean Casey being a top 20 name. Do we want to say is it top 20 name at the national meet or top 20 name in our rankings?
Up to you. Your hot
You know
take.
what? Let's go bolder. Let's go top 20 at the national meet. Okay,
National meet. All
let's
right.
go top 20 national meet.
So all right. So I think everything you're saying, I don't disagree with. The only caveat I guess I would put in there is this is his first season training at altitude.
Yeah,
I that's my only like bit of nervousness around that where it's like,
sure.
does he acclimate quickly enough? I think this like spring he could have a huge year, and then I think next year absolutely. So I think that's where it's like there's a little bit of nervousness there. And again, we're making a big jump here. We're not just going to All American. We're going all the way to top 20. So I think this is an 8. I think this is very spicy. I like it. I like that you're picking your guy, and I've been high on him as well, but not quite as high as you. But
Yeah.
I think I'm more like, hey, in the long term, this is someone who can develop into something like that. But I like the pick. It is very spicy though, because he's going to have to leapfrog a lot of names.
Yeah, like, listen, don't get me wrong. My conviction behind this one is actually lesser than that of the Penn State one.
Yeah.
I actually feel like not terrible about the Penn State one. I actually feel pretty good about the Penn State one. This one is like a Jesus take the wheel kind of thing. It's like I believe in you. Just please back me up on this one, or at least get close. At least get
Yep.
close enough for this to be like, well, he wasn't that far off. So
I think
we
if
will
he's an
see.
All American, you can like we can do like a hat tip to you, be like,
That's
hey,
Thank
like
you.
there you go.
That's all I
Uh,
want. That's all I want. I don't know. I would have thought that he could. I don't think it would have been a surprise if half of our writers predicted him to be an All American prior to like the season starting.
really, you think that?
I think if you go to the national meet, I think he's having a decent enough season, and someone's like,
Oh, well, you're saying like our predictions right before the national meet rather than preseason.
Let me rephrase that. I think if we said who's your preseason All American team, which is top, well, I guess top 40, let's just say
40.
preseason
Yeah.
All American picks, if Dean Casey was sporadically shown in there, I would not be surprised at all. Maybe half of
Okay.
our writers is a little bit much, but if
Yeah.
maybe a third of our writers were there, I don't think I would have been surprised. No.
And when Garrett says a third, he means there's three of us, and he's that one third.
Well, no, but it's
I'm messing with you. I know.
the women's team also does all the All American picks as well. Okay, so there's like eight. There's like eight people, seven or eight, I think. So
No, I'm messing with you. Yeah, no, I hear that. I think that he was someone in our anybody in our honorable mention. I think being put into
yeah,
a preseason All American conversation is not unreasonable. So, all right. I always enjoy doing these hot takes.
yeah.
I will make sure that we wrap back up on those next year as well. And hey, maybe we'll get one of them right this year. I do feel more confident in this year's picks than last year. Last year, I feel like we were really shooting from the hip and going bold
We were. So let's recount. You think Eastern Kentucky is going to be a top 10 team at the national meet? Is
at the
that correct?
national meet.
At the
National meet.
national meet, I think Dean Casey's going to be a top 20 name at the national meet. You have the BYU men or the BYU women winning a national title this fall
Yep,
as a team. And then I have the Penn State women being a top 15 team at some point this season in our rankings, correct?
correct. I'm excited to see how it plays out.
Okay. All right. Well, Ben, I think that's all I got.
All right. Well, until next week, remember to leave those rating and reviews on Apple and Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. Leave a comment. Until next week, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.